feel one side, you push it over, it pops out on the other side. And then you come down and you have a trichlid cartilage and a thyroid cartilage. So here's going to be the thyroid cartilage, and then you feel that little notch right there. And I don't know if, again, sometimes when you look in acupuncture books, they talk about anatomy differently than in Western medicine books. And I think this is probably the laryngeal cartilage too. I don't know for sure about that. And then you have the cricoid cartilage is the next one if you follow down on the thyroid cartilage, and then the next big, hard to talk and do this at the same time. The next big one underneath here is going to be that. So that's this right here. And then we did before where you have the external occipital protuberance, and then that line that goes across there, that's where it's going to be the attachment for the trapezius muscle. And it's kind of hard, but theoretically you can palpate the different sutures of the skull, but don't worry about it. You can't do that. And then again, we've done this before where you have the mastoid process, right? But keep in mind, when you're doing the different point locations, they'll start with the mastoid as a landmark, and it'll say, go posterior, inferior to the mastoid. That's why it's important that you need to know all those different paired terms, like medial, lateral, superior, inferior, anterior, posterior, and all this. And then you have the zygomatic arch, right? So I mean, technically it can go all the way across, all the way over to here. Right, so there's that. And then the sphenoid bone's the only part where it's more superficial is going to be kind of behind the temple here. You can't really differentiate it between other different bones because it's under the temporalis muscle. And then we've gone over this before where you have the condyloid process or the mandibular condyle, and then the other process here. Coronoid, that's one that pops out. And so this is part of the reason why you need to know all these things here, because like this one it talks about, says at the lower border of the zygomatic arch and the depression anterior to the condyloid process of the mandible. So you're using all those landmarks to be able to find these points. It's going to be more for like the written stuff for the final. So you need to know just actions of muscles, right? Okay, what are muscles that flex the neck?
No, it's vagina.
You're going to have the SCM, the scalene, the longus capitis, and the longus coli. Okay. The longus capitis and the longus coli, we didn't really talk much about those, but those are deep muscles that are on the front part of the spine. They're more deep in here and they're going to flex. Okay. We'll talk more about extensor muscles. Okay, so extension, you're going to have all these different ones here. The trapezius, levator scapula, sphenius. We didn't really go over this rectus capitis posterior. Some of these are more deep suboccipital muscles, and we didn't really cover those. We went more over just the basic ones. Like you need to know the origin insertion of the levator scapulae, the trapezius, all the different muscles that we went over when we talked about the neck, right? And what muscle would this be right here? This is trapezius here. This is D. Okay, well, where's the scapula? It was the levator scapula, it'd be over here, right? Sphenius, right. And where does it go to? The head. So is it capitis or cervix? Capitis. And then the rotators of the neck. Okay, you don't necessarily need to get all into this detail. I'm just taking this out of the trail guide. Okay, it's more simpler stuff like neck, what does neck flexion, but when we talked about in the actual lecture, we talked about each different muscle. You need to know the origin, insertion, and the action. Right? And then lateral flexion. Again, a lot of these muscles are going to have multiple actions, right? But again, just go over when we just study in the notes that you have for the origin and action of the different muscles in the neck. Don't worry as much about these highway things. And we talked a little bit about the muscles of mastication. All right, so everybody can palpate the sternocleidomastoid from one end to the other, right? It goes from the mastoid down into the clavicle and the sternum. And then if you go a little bit posterior to this sternocleidomastoid, that's where you're going to find the scalene muscles in here. It's not like you're going to have to palpate individually each different scalene muscle, but just understand that it appears as the SCM, that the scalenes are going to be just posterior to that. And I think I talked about that before, where to feel the scalenes, if you take like a sudden inhalation, like that, because those are accessory muscles of respiration, because they attach to the first and second ribs, so they're pulling up the ribs. So you can see if you see there, the scalenes.
Are we going to be palpating skin? They're not here.
But I mean, in here in the trail guide book, they talk about palpating each individual one, but you're not necessarily going to do that. And then obviously, right, you can find the masseter muscle. And then temporalis is going to be very, again, if you clench the jaw, you can feel that muscle contract. Not really going to be palpating the pterygoids, but if you're getting under in here. And sometimes different techniques, if you're doing muscle work and things, you go and work the inside muscles of the jaw. Just got to be careful that the patient doesn't bite you. And then some other landmarks, obviously when you're doing needling, if you're doing stuff on the front here, you want to make sure to avoid the arteries. Right? So it's good to know where the arteries are here. And then also other landmarks are lymph nodes that are going to be in here. Okay? And then the brachial plexus and the subclavian artery and vein. Okay, so then we'll get into the back. Okay, so then we talked about all these different things here, and there was a lot of different landmarks that we had on the front. And then here's the reason why you need to know those. Again, you don't need to know these points, but we talked about this angle oblique. And then there was another question that came up before about the sternocostal angle. Okay, that's going to be right here. So it's between the sternum and the ribs. So it's basically right here. I mean, I don't know if it's technically, it would be right here at that little groove between the xiphoid and the rib, but usually I think it's referred to as being basically right there. Because if you say, it's one of the points that it mentions it for a landmark. And then again, this is the atlas, okay, so that's the one that doesn't have the spinous process. If you go down below the EOP, and then you follow the skull, and then it kind of dips in, and then the first spinous process that you're going to feel is actually going to be C2. So you're coming down from here. I mean, obviously that's a big jump from here all the way into there, and you're not going to feel the atlas. You're going to feel C2. Okay, so you're going down the center. Okay. So coming down here, you're going to go from the EOP, then you're going to feel C2. And then, like I said, on the side, you can feel the transverse process of the atlas, which is going to be right under the master.